Hello everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy Note 10 Plus and see how this phone holds up in 2023. Now, the whole entire Note 10 lineup I think was very important. I like these phones a lot. Unfortunately, Samsung has totally removed the Note lineup, but they do have some sort of like spiritual successor on the Ultra lineup that we have now. So I'm glad Samsung's still kind of making these phones one way or another, but just know that the Note moniker has completely faded away. So if you want to pick up some phones I would recommend this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Samsung Galaxy Note 10 Plus, we had on the front a 6.8-inch dynamic AMOLED display. Now personally, this was probably one of the bigger upgrades Samsung made from one Note phone to the other. They finally gave us a hole punch display on these phones, which kind of matched the Galaxy S10 earlier that year in 2019, and it was a very, very good looking panel. This was a centered hole punch display, so it matches very well in line with hole punch displays that we have nowadays. It was kind of like this rectangular designed phone too. I know most phones are rectangular, but it was like squared off on the sides and it looked really good. Like, I really liked the way this phone looked at that moment, and even now it still holds up very well. So much so, in fact, I think like the Pixel 6 Pro, Pixel 7 Pro, those phones look almost identical to this phone, at least the styling of these phones on the front. Now it's still a 60Hz panel, but it still looks very good. It's a 1440p display, very good display too. I mean, you couldn't really ask for a much better display than this thing besides a 120Hz panel on this thing. Now on the bottom, we had our USB Type-C port and we had our S Pen. So as I mentioned before, it's really nice to have that stylus. It's super cool. It unlocks so many more features. I've noticed that Samsung, kind of talks about it not as much as they used to though. Like in their S23 Ultra keynote, they didn't really hit on it that much, even though it still has an S Pen built in. So just like another one of those things to keep in mind, it's still a really cool feature to have. And this phone also had a micro SD card slot inside of it too. So that was another massive feature to have inside of a phone like this. To have that micro SD card slot is awesome, and I'm so happy that Samsung kept it, on this phone. They removed it on the Note 10, but they did keep it on this phone, which is really nice. Now on the back, we had this standard glass back, and it actually had this super nice color aura to it. It was like super, super nice. I liked it a lot at that moment, and I still like it a ton. You had a triple camera setup on the top left. You had a wireless charging on this phone, reverse wireless charging on this phone as well. You had IP68 dust and water resistance up to the, on this phone as well, which is really cool. And overall, this is still a very good looking phone. I would put this in line to probably one of the better looking phones probably Samsung's ever made. And I would probably say it looked probably the best in 2019. I mean, that year we had the Samsung Galaxy, I would probably say the OnePlus 7 Pro probably won in 2019. But that year we had the 7 Pro, we had the iPhone 11 Pro Max, we had the Galaxy S10 Plus, and I would probably say this phone and the OnePlus 7 Pro probably look the best when they come down to it. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. Now in the camera standpoint, this phone had that triple camera setup on the back like I mentioned. It had a 12 megapixel wide angle lens, 12 megapixel telephoto lens, 16 megapixel ultra wide camera, and it also had a 0.3 megapixel depth lens, and it also had a 10 megapixel camera on the front. Now, one thing that I mentioned for a long period of time now is that Samsung really knocked it out of the park with this camera. I feel like they did a great job with this camera at that moment, and I still think it holds up very, very well. Now, is it perfect? No, but you still have a lot of capability. So for one, you still have 4K at 60, you can film it on the front and the back. This was right before the generation we started getting 8K capability, so it's not like a big deal, but it's still a nice thing to kind of have. If you want to, you can still film really high resolutions on this thing, and it's still a very nice camera. There's still a ton of features built inside of this phone as well, and this thing recently just got unsupported with software. So there were lots of camera features added, and I remember when every single, when One UI 2.1 came out, or 2.5, whatever it's called, and the next version, there were just so many camera features being added, and I'm very happy that the Note 10 Plus was able to experience a lot of those specific improvements as well. So when it comes down to it, I'll definitely tell you the Samsung Galaxy Note 10 Plus, in my opinion, has a very good camera for what it is. So, if you still want to use it, I'd say go for it. It's still pretty good for how old this phone is. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. Now, in terms of the software and the longevity, like I mentioned before, this specific phone is kind of unsupported with software right now. So it's kind of sad, which, it's kind of expected. That's just kind of how it happens. But with this type of phone, in this day and age, I will say it's still completely worth using. I would say, this phone is not going anywhere anytime soon. You're still getting security updates. but just know that Android 13 or Android 12, the One UI 4 update, it was pretty much the last update this thing got. So we just got One UI 5 on a lot of phones out there too. So it's not like you're going to be missing out on too much, but like I said, for the most part, if you are expecting for this phone to last a huge long amount of time, this is probably not going to be that phone for you. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. Now in the performance segment, this phone has that Qualcomm Snapdragon 855 chipset inside of it with 12 gigs of RAM on both models. Now that was a very good approach on Samsung to actually make a phone with 12 gigs of RAM. You want to know why? Because 12 gigabytes of RAM on a phone, even on a base model like this or the top tier model, is still a crazy amount of RAM to have on a device. So much so, in fact, that even nowadays, a majority of phones that are still coming out only tap out with 8 gigs of RAM. The iPhones are still at 6. The iPhone, the Galaxy S23s are at 8 for the base models. I think the Pixel 7 is still at 8. So, if you had 12 gigabytes of RAM on this phone at that time, it is crazy the amount of capability you're getting. So from my perspective right there, that is a massive thing to keep in mind. Now beyond that, I think this phone is still performing pretty well for how old this phone is. I've seen a few complaints here and there with One UI updates for the last few years that sometimes the phone slows down, but usually it's been pretty consistent. One UI has seen a lot of improvement, especially since the first day I've used it. I remember when One UI first came out, it was not that great of a performing. I didn't really like it too much, and then it kind of slowly grew on me, and I kind of like it now. So that was kind of one thing that kind of shocked me. In terms of the raw performance though, I mean, if you're playing heavy intensive games, that's always going to be kind of a little bit of a drag for some people. But I would say that if you had a phone like a Note 10 Plus, I've seen so many people still get really good performance from this phone. In fact, a lot of emulator videos that I watch and a lot of emulators I actually use, a lot of the Discord communities actually talk about phones with this same exact chipset inside. Maybe it's not this exact phone, but that 855 chipset, they mention this chipset all of the time because a lot of phones used it. The Pixels of that year used it. The Galaxy S10 used it that year. The OnePlus 7 Pro, I believe, used it. So a lot of phones that year used it. And a lot of people are still using those phones too. So I will definitely say the performance of this phone still gets a thumbs up for how old this phone is. It's not competing with any phones that we have nowadays. They're much better now, but for how old this phone is, it's pretty interesting. This phone also had a 4300 mAh battery. It's definitely not the smallest battery size of all time, and it was pretty good at that moment, but it also has wireless and reverse wireless charging, which is so nice to have too. So to kind of sum up this video, what I'll definitely tell you is, I think the Samsung Galaxy Note 10 Plus is still a pretty decent phone in terms of hardware. The only issue that I kind of have with this type of device though, is that to be honest, it is kind of sad that this thing, isn't getting any more versions of software. It's kind of expected. I mean, after 4 years, you kind of expect these types of phones to not last as long as they used to. But it is always so nice when you have older phones like these that still are, cheaper in the used market, but are still such solid devices. Those are the type of devices that I always love looking at. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.